Three men, left for dead in a rusted van. The only one to find them, a lone artist and her scarred rescue dog. They had no weapons, no way out, and the kidnappers were coming back. They didn't know they'd just made their final mistake. This is a story of how a mind became a weapon, and loyalty became a shield. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe in silent heroes, hit that subscribe button. The late autumn air in the Oregon Cascades was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying pine needles. A low-slung sun filtered through the dense canopy of Douglas firs, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. For Alara Hayes, this wilderness was both a sanctuary and a studio. She had fled the suffocating gray of Portland a month ago, seeking refuge in a rented cabin whose isolation was as profound as the creative block that had paralyzed her for the better part of a year. At 24, with long, dark blonde hair tied back in a messy knot, and thoughtful gray eyes that held a persistent shadow of weariness, she felt older than her years. Her light gray t-shirt, soft and worn, was smudged with charcoal, and her sturdy hiking pants bore the marks of her daily treks. The only ritual that seemed to offer any peace. Her sole companion was Kaiser. He was a magnificent German shepherd, large for his breed, with a classic black and tan saddleback coat that shone even in the dim forest light. At 5 years old, he still possessed the powerful, disciplined physique of his former life as a K-9 officer, but his intelligent amber eyes held a deep, knowing sensitivity. A thin, silvery scar cut a faint line across his muzzle, a permanent reminder of the day his handler, Officer Miller, hadn't come home from a call. Ilara had adopted him from a special rescue for retired service dogs, two broken souls finding solace in each other's quiet company. She kept his worn leather K-9 collar on a hook by the cabin door, a tribute to a past neither of them spoke of, but both understood. He was her anchor, a silent witness to her struggle against the ghost of her ex-boyfriend Damon, whose parting words echoed in the silence. "Your art is pretty, Ilara, but it lacks real pain." The criticism had been a surgical strike, severing her connection to the canvas. That afternoon, they ventured further than usual, following a trail that narrowed into a mere whisper of a path. Ilara carried her sketchbook, though she knew it would likely remain empty. It was more of a habit now, a pretense of being the artist she once was. Kaiser trotted ahead, his gait confident yet constantly alert. He would pause, one paw lifted, ears swiveling to catch the snap of a twig or the distant call of a raven. He was easily startled by the rumble of logging trucks on the distant highway, a low growl vibrating in his chest, a ghost of the explosion that had shaped his second life. It was Kaiser who sensed the change first. He stopped dead in the middle of the trail, his powerful body going rigid. His head lifted, nostrils flaring as he tasted the wind. The air had shifted. Mingled with the familiar scent of pine was something alien and discordant, the acrid smell of rust and hot oil, underscored by something sour and metallic like old fear. Ilara placed a hand on his back, feeling the tense muscles beneath her palm. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. He didn't respond to her touch. Ignoring her, he veered sharply off the path, pushing through a curtain of ferns with a quiet urgency. Driven by the palpable tension radiating from him, Ilara followed, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. She trusted his instincts implicitly. They had been honed by years of training she could only imagine. They emerged into a small, unnatural clearing. And there it was, a battered white cargo van, its paint peeling to reveal angry patches of rust. It was parked precariously on the edge of a muddy embankment. Two of its wheels sunk deep into the soft earth, as if it had tried to flee the very woods it was now trapped in. The vehicle's presence was a violation, a blot of industrial decay on the pristine landscape. A profound, deathly silence hung over it, broken only by the sighing of the wind. Ilara scanned the area. No footprints, no signs of a camp. Just the abandoned van, sitting like a tombstone. As they crept closer, Kaiser's low growl returned, deeper and more menacing than his reaction to the trucks. It was a sound of contained aggression, a warning honed by duty. He lowered his body, hugging the ground, his gaze fixed on the van's rear doors. Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She could feel the wrongness of it, a tangible pressure in the air. That's when they heard it. It began as a low chuckle from the far side of the vehicle, a harsh, grating sound that held no humor. It was the sound of cruelty. The laugh was cut short by a heavy, sickening thud, the unmistakable impact of a fist against flesh, followed immediately by a muffled, agonized groan from within the metal walls of the van. Ilara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her blood ran cold. Kaiser's growl exploded into a short, sharp bark of pure threat before she could silence him. He understood. She understood. This wasn't a broken-down vehicle. It was a cage. The raw, threatening bark was ripped from Kaiser's chest before Ilara could stop it. Her heart leaped into her throat. With a choked gasp, she lunged, wrapping her arms around his powerful neck and pulling him back into the dense cover of a fern grove. "Quiet," she breathed, her voice a desperate hiss against his fur. He instantly obeyed, sinking into a low crouch beside her. But a tense tremor ran through his body, his muscles coiled and ready. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Two men rounded the back of the van, drawn by the sound. The first was a mountain of a man named Reese, probably in his early 30s, with a thick neck and a brutish face. He wore a stained flannel jacket over a faded t-shirt, his jeans muddy and worn. He moved with a heavy, impatient gait, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The second man, Silas, was his opposite. Perhaps a decade older, he was lean and moved with a chilling economy of motion. Dressed in dark, clean trousers and a fitted black jacket, he looked unnervingly out of place in the wilderness. His face was sharp and intelligent, but his eyes were flat and devoid of emotion, like polished river stones. He was the one in charge. "Probably just a deer," Reese grumbled, kicking at a loose rock. Silas didn't answer. His cold eyes scanned the silent woods, lingering for a moment on the very spot where Ilara and Kaiser were concealed. Ilara held her breath, convinced he could see her, that he could hear the frantic drumming of her own heart. "Check on the cargo," Silas finally said, his voice quiet but carrying an absolute authority. Reese unlocked the rear doors with a loud clang and swung one open. For a horrifying moment, Ilara's view was unobscured. 3 men were huddled inside, bound with thick zip ties. Their faces were swollen masses of purple and blue bruises, their clothes torn. The youngest of them, a man in his early 20s with dark tousled hair, let out a dry, rasping cough. Reese reacted instantly, stepping into the van and striking the man across the face with the back of his hand. "I said shut it," he snarled. The young man's head snapped back, but his eyes, when they refocused, burned with a defiant fire. Silas watched the exchange without a flicker of interest, his attention on the screen of his phone. "Leave him, just keep them breathing," he said dismissively. The cleaner confirmed, "Dawn." He pocketed his phone. "Let's go. I want to be miles from here when he's done." Dawn? The word was a death sentence, delivered with all the emotion of a weather report. Reese slammed the heavy door shut, plunging the interior back into darkness and sealing their fate. The finality of the sound was like a physical blow. The 2 men walked away, their voices fading as they headed back down the path they'd come from. Ilara waited until she could no longer hear their footsteps, her body trembling uncontrollably. The memory of Damon's face loomed in her mind, the night she'd finally left him. He hadn't hit her, but he had stood in the doorway, blocking her path, his voice a calm, poisonous whisper. "You're nothing without me, Ilara. You'll run back before sunrise." The feeling of being trapped, of her own will being erased by his, flooded back, cold and paralyzing. She had run then. Every instinct screamed at her to run now. But then she thought of the young man in the van, Liam. The name just appeared in her mind. She thought of the fire in his eyes, the refusal to be broken even as he was struck. He wasn't running, he was fighting. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she crept out of the ferns and circled to the side of the van, staying low. She peered through the small, grimy window set high in the panel. She could just make out Liam's silhouette. He had seen her. His face was turned toward the window. Then she heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping from inside. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, 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 SOS. The code her grandfather, a Navy man, had taught her as a child. A desperate silent scream for help, beaten out by a man who refused to die in silence. It cut through her fear, through the ghost of Damon's voice. That rhythmic beat was the sound of a heart that hadn't given up. He was fighting, and she was his only witness. The decision wasn't brave, it was a reckoning. She had run from one prison. She would not abandon 3 men to die in another. Her trembling stopped. She looked down at her backpack, her artist's tools nestled inside. For the first time in months, she saw not the symbols of her failure, but the elements of a plan. The artist's mind, once a prisoner of self-doubt, was now a cartographer of survival. Alara moved through the undergrowth with a newfound purpose, the fear in her veins crystallizing into a cold, sharp clarity. The terrain was her canvas, the elements her palette. She unzipped her backpack and laid out her tools, a small metal flask of turpentine, a stick of drawing charcoal, and a single thick page torn from her sketchbook. These were no longer implements of art. They were instruments of a desperate gamble. She chose her spot with a painter's eye for composition and a strategist's mind for wind direction. A dry, rocky outcrop, a quarter-mile from the van, littered with a thick carpet of pine needles. The autumn air was still, which worked against her, but the ridge would help carry the smoke upwards. Kneeling, she worked quickly, her hands surprisingly steady. She uncapped the turpentine, its sharp chemical scent cutting through the pine. She soaked the sketchbook page, the paper turning a translucent brown, then buried it beneath a carefully constructed pyre of dry needles and twigs. The charcoal was for the spark. Scraping it against the rough edge of a piece of flint she found nearby, she sent a series of pathetic, short-lived sparks into the kindling. It felt hopeless. Her fingers grew numb, her breath catching with each failed attempt. Then, a single spark caught. A tiny orange ember glowed, hesitated, and then greedily consumed the turpentine-soaked paper. A thin tendril of gray smoke rose, followed by another. It wasn't the billowing column of a forest fire she had envisioned, but a hazy, anemic plume that drifted lazily into the twilight air. It was enough. "What the hell is that?" Reese's voice, laced with annoyance, carried through the quiet woods. "Smoke," Silas stated, his tone clipped and analytical. The sound of their footsteps grew closer as they came to investigate. Alara pressed herself flat behind a moss-covered log, her heart hammering. "Probably some idiot camper," Reese grumbled. "Should we scare him off?" "No," Silas said sharply, and Alara heard the cold calculation in his voice. "You go check it out. Be quiet. I don't like coincidences." He was smarter than she'd hoped. The plan had fractured. Now she was facing the leader alone. As Reese's heavy footsteps receded toward the smoke, Silas remained by the van, a motionless silhouette against the fading light. He stood with his back to her, watching the path where his partner had disappeared. The opportunity was flawed, incomplete. Alara looked at Kaiser, who lay beside her, a statue of coiled potential. He watched her, waiting for the signal. Her new plan was formless, an improvisation sketched in adrenaline. She found a small, smooth stone, whispering a command so low it was barely a breath. "Watch him." She gave Kaiser the hand signal for a silent circle. He understood, melting into the shadows to loop around to the far side of the clearing. Alara took a deep breath and with a flick of her wrist, sent the stone arcing through the air. It landed with a sharp clack against a rock face deep in the woods to Silas's left. He spun around instantly, gun drawn, his body dropping into a shooter's stance. His attention was completely focused on the sound. In that moment of distraction, Kaiser, now positioned on the opposite side, let out a single, low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Silas froze, caught between two unseen threats. His head snapped from the direction of the stone to the direction of the growl, his eyes trying to pierce the gathering dark. He was confused, his certainty shattered. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, painted with sound and shadow. That was her window. Alara burst from her cover, not a sound escaping her lips. She ran, low and fast, her feet flying over the forest floor. She wasn't running from the van. She was running towards it, towards the driver's side door. Every step was a silent prayer, a defiance of the man who had called her weak. She reached the cold metal, her fingers closing around the handle, just as Silas began to move back toward the vehicle. He hadn't seen her, not yet. She was no longer an artist paralyzed by fear. She was a strategist, and the forest was her accomplice. The cold kiss of the metal handle was a point of no return. Alara yanked the driver's door open, the hinges screaming a protest that was lost in the rustle of the wind. She slid inside, the worn vinyl of the seat cracking beneath her. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something metallic, like old blood. Her eyes darted around the dark cab, searching. Her fingers scrabbled under the passenger seat, closing around the satisfying, heavy weight of a tire iron. It felt solid, real, a stark contrast to the ethereal charcoal sticks in her bag. This was a tool for breaking things. There was no time for finesse. She turned to the metal partition separating the cab from the cargo hold and slammed the tip of the iron into the flimsy lock. The first blow only dented it. The second, fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline, sent a scream of tortured metal echoing through the small space. With a third, final strike, the lock shattered, sending splinters of rusted steel flying. She wrenched the partition door open and scrambled into the oppressive darkness of the back. The stench of sweat and terror was overwhelming. In the gloom, she could see Liam's eyes, wide and wild. "The ties," he rasped, his voice raw. She didn't have a knife that could cut them, but she had leverage. Bracing his bound hands against the van's corrugated wall, she wedged the tire iron into the thick plastic of the zip tie and twisted. It snapped with a loud crack. Freedom! Just then, a bellow of rage erupted from outside. Reese had returned. He ripped the rear doors open, his massive frame silhouetted against the dying light. "You..." He never finished the sentence. Liam, newly freed, lunged forward with a guttural roar. He wasn't a fighter, but he was desperate. He tackled Reese at the knees, a clumsy but effective assault. As the two men crashed to the floor, Alara freed the second man, Marcus, who immediately joined the fray, his fists a desperate, clumsy force. But the real threat appeared at the front partition. Silas stepped through, his gun held steady, his face a mask of cold fury. The chaotic struggle in the back was a sideshow. He was the cold center of the storm, and his eyes were locked on Alara. "Drop it," he commanded, his voice perfectly calm. Alara froze, the heavy tire iron suddenly feeling useless in her hands. The world narrowed to the dark, unwavering circle of the gun's muzzle. This was it, the checkmate. And then, a black and tan blur exploded from the shadows beside the van. Kaiser had waited for his moment. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. He launched himself through the open partition door in a silent, lethal arc, a missile of pure loyalty. He wasn't aiming for a leg or an arm. He was aiming for the threat. His jaws clamped down on Silas's gun hand with the force of a hydraulic press. The gun fired. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. A sound of pure agony was ripped from Kaiser's throat as the bullet tore through his shoulder. But he did not let go. His weight and momentum dragged Silas's arm down, his desperate loyalty overriding the searing pain. The sight of Kaiser, wounded and crying out, but still fighting for her, shattered the last of Alara's fear. It was replaced by a primal scream of rage that clawed its way up from her soul. While Silas was tangled with the dog, she surged forward, swinging the tire iron not like an artist, but like a warrior. It wasn't thought, but pure, protective instinct. The iron bar connected with Silas's temple with a final, sickening crunch. He collapsed, his fall as silent as his approach had been. The echo of the gunshot hung in the air, a single, damning note. In the sudden, ringing silence, Alara fell to her knees beside Kaiser, her hands hovering over the bleeding wound. They had won, but the victory had come at a terrible price. In a world that often moves too fast, this story is a powerful reminder that miracles don't always arrive with thunder and lightning. Sometimes they come with the quiet padding of 4 paws and the fierce, unwavering love in a dog's eyes. It teaches us that God's messengers don't always have wings. Sometimes they have fur, and they are sent to remind us of the profound strength found in loyalty and courage. The bravery of an ordinary woman and her faithful companion is not just a tale of survival. It is a reflection of the light that that exists within all of us. Every day we are presented with choices, to look away from hardship or to step forward. We may not face down armed men in a forest, but we face our own silent battles. This story asks us to believe that we, too, have the strength to act, to protect, and to make a difference, often with nothing more than the courage in our hearts. God places these moments in our path, not to test us, but to reveal the heroes we were always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. Leave a comment below to let us know what this story meant to you, or to share a time when a quiet hero, human or animal, made a difference in your life. And to ensure you don't miss more stories of hope and courage, be sure to subscribe to the channel. May God bless each and every one of you watching. Stay safe and never stop looking for the miracles that surround you every single day.